You didn't plan to think about him this much. It just started happening. And now, he's there in the quiet moments, in between tasks, in the seconds before you fall asleep. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a passing thought, just curiosity. But if it were nothing, it wouldn't feel like this. There's a strange weight to it, isn't there? The way your mind returns to him without asking your permission. The way a small memory suddenly feels bigger than it should. And here's the part you haven't said out loud. You're starting to wonder if he feels it too. Most people dismiss this phase. They call it infatuation, distraction, overthinking. But they misunderstand what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because when you can't stop thinking about him, something is shifting, not just inside you, inside him too. And the first secret is subtle. When you think about someone intensely, you change the way you show up in the world. You don't notice it at first. Your voice softens when his name comes up. Your energy shifts when you see his message. Your eyes search for him in a room before you even realize you're looking. Energy is quieter than words. But it travels further. He may not know why he suddenly feels your presence more strongly. He may not understand why certain moments feel charged, but he feels something. This is where many people misread the situation. You assume he has no idea. You assume your thoughts are private, safe, contained inside your own mind. But humans are wired to detect attention. When someone is thinking about us deeply, repeatedly, emotionally, we sense it. Not logically, not in a way we can explain, but in a way that shifts our awareness. He may start checking his phone more often. He may replay conversations. He may feel a pull toward you without understanding the origin of it. You probably didn't notice it at the time, but the last time you spoke, there was a pause, a slightly longer eye contact, a moment that stretched half a second beyond normal. Most people ignore that half second, but that's where everything changes. Because while you were going home wondering why you couldn't stop thinking about him, he was sitting with a feeling he couldn't name. And this leads to the second secret. When you think about him constantly, your brain strengthens emotional pathways connected to him. Every memory becomes sharper, every detail more meaningful. But here's what's rarely discussed. Memory is contagious. When you remember someone with intensity, you subtly reinforce shared experiences. And shared experiences live in both minds. He may suddenly recall something small you said, a random comment, a laugh, a look, not because it was dramatic, but because emotional energy highlights it. This is where many people misinterpret the silence. You think, if he felt anything, he would say something. But silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means processing. Men often process emotions differently, slower, internally, without immediate expression. That doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something is forming beneath the surface. Stay with this, because it matters more than it seems. There's a third shift happening. When you can't stop thinking about him, you unconsciously start aligning your behavior with possibility. You choose certain clothes with more intention. You replay conversations to improve them in your head. You imagine future interactions. It feels harmless, maybe even embarrassing. But intention has direction, and direction creates tension. He may begin to feel slightly nervous around you, slightly more aware of how he stands, how he speaks, how he responds. He may not know why your presence feels heavier than before, but tension is often the first sign of importance. You probably didn't notice that he held eye contact just a little longer last time, or that he adjusted his tone when speaking to you, or that he asked a question that felt slightly deeper than usual. These are not accidents. This is where many people misread the situation. They look for grand gestures, confessions, clear declarations. But real shifts begin microscopically. And here's the fourth secret, the one that makes people uncomfortable. When you think about someone repeatedly, your intuition sharpens around them. You start noticing inconsistencies, emotional fluctuations, small changes in his behavior. You pick up on things you previously ignored. It's not obsession, it's focus. And focus creates emotional sensitivity. He may suddenly feel seen in a way he isn't used to. You ask questions that land deeper. You respond in ways that feel more precise. You remember details others forget. Being truly noticed is rare. And when someone feels truly noticed, they either lean in or they pull back. This is where everything becomes delicate. Because when someone feels themselves becoming important to you, it activates something inside them too. Responsibility, desire, fear, all at once. What happens next depends on his emotional maturity. And this is the part no one talks about. Some men feel the growing connection and step forward. Others feel it and step away slightly, not because they don't care, but because caring suddenly feels real. Stay with this, because it explains more than you think. The fifth secret is psychological. When you think about him intensely, you unconsciously create micro mirrors. You reflect his energy back to him. If he's calm, you become calmer. If he's distant, you become slightly guarded. If he's warm, you soften. He starts seeing parts of himself through you, and that can be powerful or confronting, because sometimes when someone sees themselves clearly for the first time, they don't know how to respond. You may notice him becoming quieter, or more curious, or slightly inconsistent. Most people panic at inconsistency. But inconsistency often means internal conflict. He's asking himself questions he didn't expect to ask. Why does she affect me like this? Why do I think about her when I don't intend to? Why does her silence feel louder than others? You think you're the only one lying awake replaying moments. But you might not be. This is where many people misread the situation. They assume emotional intensity flows in one direction. But connection is rarely one-sided without signs. Even if he doesn't articulate it, something shifts in his perception of you. Now here's the sixth secret. When you can't stop thinking about him, you begin to emotionally invest before anything is defined. That investment changes your reactions, your patience, your tolerance, your hopes. And humans can sense when they are becoming significant in someone else's story. He may test the space slightly, pull back just enough to see if you notice, take a little longer to respond, say something mildly ambiguous, not to manipulate, but to measure. Measurement is a quiet human instinct. If she steps back too, maybe it wasn't that deep. If she stays warm, maybe this is safe. If she reacts strongly, maybe this is serious. This is where many people accidentally reveal their feelings, not through confession, through reaction. You probably didn't realize that the last time he delayed replying, he noticed how you responded. Whether you changed your tone, whether you asked fewer questions, whether your energy cooled, he's reading you too. Stay with this. Because the seventh secret is the most important. When you think about someone constantly, you're not just thinking about them. You're thinking about who you become around them. That version of you, the softer one, the braver one, the more vulnerable one, starts to feel real. And when that version feels real, you start wanting spaces where she can exist. He may sense that shift. He may feel that conversations with you are slightly different, more layered, more intentional, less casual, and that can be magnetic or intimidating. This is where the story either deepens or quietly fades. But here's something you haven't considered. Sometimes, when you can't stop thinking about him, it's not about destiny. It's about resonance. Something in him mirrors something in you. Unresolved emotions, familiar patterns, desired futures. And when two people unconsciously recognize familiarity, their minds return to each other repeatedly. It doesn't mean it will last forever. It means it matters right now. If this is resonating with you, and you feel like these quiet emotional shifts are things no one ever explains clearly, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Not because you have to, but because conversations like this deserve a place to continue. Now, let's go deeper. Because there's something even subtler happening. When you think about him often, you begin constructing small, imagined futures. Not dramatic ones, just fragments. A conversation that hasn't happened yet, a place you might go, a joke you might share. These imagined futures change your body language the next time you see him. Hope is visible, even when you try to hide it. And hope is powerful. He may notice that you look at him slightly differently, as if you're not just seeing who he is now, but who he could be. Being seen as potential can awaken something profound in someone, but it can also create pressure. This is where many connections become fragile, because when someone senses expectation, they evaluate whether they can meet it. He may withdraw slightly to assess his own capacity, not because you did anything wrong, but because significance requires courage. You probably didn't notice the moment he hesitated before sharing something personal, or the time he almost said something vulnerable, and changed the subject. Those almost moments matter. They reveal internal movement, and internal movement is the beginning of emotional gravity. Here's something even more subtle. When you think about him constantly, your nervous system associates him with stimulation, anticipation, slight adrenaline, emotional alertness. Your body reacts before logic does. If he senses that reaction, the way your breathing changes, the way your attention sharpens, he may unconsciously mirror it. Mirroring creates rhythm. Rhythm creates connection. But rhythm requires two participants. This is where you must observe carefully. Is he matching your pace? Is he leaning in when you lean in? Is he opening when you open? Or is he staying still while you move forward? These answers are rarely loud. They're in micro-expressions, pauses, timing. Stay with this, because it determines everything. Sometimes when you can't stop thinking about him, it's because a part of you recognizes possibility before reality catches up. But possibility without alignment becomes projection, and projection feels intense. He may feel the intensity. He may feel your attention like a spotlight, and spotlights make people choose, step forward or step out. You might not realize it yet, but the more you think about him, the more you are clarifying your own emotional depth, and depth attracts depth, or exposes shallowness. This is where truth slowly reveals itself, not in one dramatic moment, but in repeated subtle interactions. If he starts initiating more, asking deeper questions, finding reasons to connect, something is growing. If he remains distant, inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, something else is being clarified. Either way, your thoughts are not wasted. They are signals, not about him, about you. And this is where many people misunderstand the entire experience. They think, why can't I stop thinking about him? As if it's a weakness. But sometimes thinking about someone repeatedly is your intuition asking you to pay attention, not to chase, not to fantasize, but to observe. Because in the space between your thoughts and his responses, the truth lives. And we're not at the end of this, not even close, because what happens next depends on something most people overlook. The moment when your thinking shifts from longing to clarity. And when that shift happens, everything changes. And when that shift happens, you won't announce it. You won't even recognize it immediately. It will feel subtle, almost quiet. At first, you'll still think about him, but the thoughts will start to sound different, less desperate for answers, less hungry for reassurance, more observant. This is where many people miss the turning point, because they assume intensity is the deepest form of connection. It isn't. Clarity is. When your thoughts about him begin to include questions instead of fantasies, something inside you is stabilizing. You'll start noticing patterns instead of moments, consistency instead of chemistry. effort instead of excitement. And here's what's happening on his side during this shift. When your energy moves from craving to calm, he feels it immediately. Remember earlier, when we talked about attention being sensed even when unspoken. The same applies here. If your energy was once slightly anxious, slightly reaching, slightly hoping, and now it becomes steady, grounded, self-contained, that change creates impact. Because when someone feels you pulling your emotional weight back into yourself, it creates space. And space does something powerful. It reveals truth. He may suddenly step forward. He may initiate more, ask more, share more. Not because you demanded it, but because your calmness removed pressure. Pressure often makes people retreat. Peace invites them closer. But this is where many people misread the situation again. They think, now he's acting differently. That must mean I need to go back to how I was before. No. Stay steady. Because what you're witnessing isn't manipulation, it's response. Humans respond to emotional shifts like tides. If you become less available internally, he has to decide whether he wants to swim toward you. And that decision tells you more than words ever could. You probably didn't notice this before, but the more you thought about him, the more you imagined what he could be. Now, as clarity grows, you start seeing what he actually is. And that's where the real story begins. Because sometimes, when you can't stop thinking about someone, it's not because they are perfect, it's because they activated something unfinished inside you. An old hope, an old wound, an old pattern. And this is the 8th shift no one talks about. When you think about him intensely for long enough, eventually your mind gets tired of uncertainty. It begins searching for emotional safety instead of emotional stimulation. You start asking yourself quieter questions. Does he feel safe? Does he show up consistently? Do I feel calm after talking to him? Or restless? Stay with this, because this is where power returns to you. The moment your thinking changes from, does he like me, to, do I actually feel good here, is the moment you regain balance. And he will feel that shift. When you stop orbiting around his reactions and start observing your own emotional state, your presence changes again. It becomes heavier, not dramatic, just grounded. He may sense that you're no longer trying to impress him, no longer subtly seeking validation, no longer adjusting yourself to fit him, and that can either draw him in deeply or expose that he was only comfortable when you were the one leaning forward. This is where many connections quietly end, not with conflict, not with confrontation, but with realization. You may still think about him, but the thoughts become informational instead of consuming. You notice when he invests. You notice when he doesn't. You stop filling in the gaps for him. And that's powerful. Because here's something you haven't considered. When you were thinking about him constantly, he may have been thinking about how you made him feel. But when you begin thinking about yourself again, he starts thinking about losing you. Scarcity changes perception. Not artificial scarcity, emotional independence. When someone senses that your world does not revolve around them, they feel the possibility of absence. And absence sharpens value. But this isn't a strategy, it's a consequence of growth. You can't fake it. He will feel whether your calmness is genuine. This is where emotional maturity becomes visible. If he steps forward with clarity, vulnerability, consistency, something real is forming. If he becomes distant, reactive, or confused by your steadiness, then perhaps what existed was sustained by imbalance. And imbalance cannot hold long term. You probably didn't realize it at the beginning when you first started thinking about him late at night. But those thoughts were never just about him. They were about you discovering how deeply you can feel, how strongly you can attach, how intensely you can hope. And now, something even deeper is happening. You're learning how to detach without bitterness, how to observe without panic, how to care without collapsing. That transformation is subtle, but it changes everything. And here's another quiet truth. Sometimes when you can't stop thinking about someone, it's because your intuition is testing alignment, not asking, is he the one, but asking, is this dynamic healthy? Your body often knows before your mind accepts it. If thinking about him leaves you anxious, uncertain, overanalyzing every detail, that's information. If thinking about him feels warm, steady, grounded, that's also information. He may not know the internal journey you've been on, but he feels the external result. Your responses become cleaner. Your boundaries become quieter but firmer. Your laughter becomes more natural, less strategic. And something fascinating happens here when you stop chasing clarity from him. Clarity begins revealing itself through him. He either rises to meet your steadiness, or he drifts away from it. Both outcomes are answers. This is where many people feel fear. Because when you stop obsessing and start observing, you risk seeing the truth. And truth removes fantasy. But it also removes confusion. You might still think about him tomorrow, and the day after that. But the quality of those thoughts will determine everything. Are they heavy or are they light? Are they rooted in possibility or in projection? Stay with this, because the final transformation is not about whether he thinks about you. It's about whether you still feel aligned with yourself when you think about him. When you reach the point where your thoughts no longer control your mood, where his response time no longer dictates your peace, where your value feels stable regardless of his behavior, that's when the energy truly shifts. And sometimes, that's when he finally feels the full weight of what you were all along. Not because you changed, but because you stopped shrinking. And if he senses that strength, he will have to decide. Step into something real, or step out of your life entirely. Either way, you will no longer be the one losing sleep. And that is where everything quietly turns in your favor. But we're not finished, because there's one more layer beneath all of this. And it explains why this experience feels so personal. And before you close this video, pause for a second. If even one part of this felt uncomfortably accurate, if it felt like someone quietly put words to thoughts you've never said out loud, that's not random. That means you're becoming more aware of yourself. And conversations like this, they don't happen often. So if you want more of these late-night honest reflections about connection, attachment, emotional clarity, take a quiet second right now and like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Not because it's a trend, not because you're told to, but because you value understanding yourself on a deeper level. And if you're comfortable, share in the comments what part of this hit you the hardest. I read them. And sometimes your words help someone else feel less alone. Now, take a breath.